Relax, grab a coffee, enjoy yourselves, and I'm going to pass over to our first moderator, Inbal Perlman, who is the Community Manager for Google for Startups. Inbal, over to you. Inbal, I think people can't hear you at the moment, so can you just check your microphone for a moment?
Is this working?
Yes, we can hear you now. So Inbal, over to you.
Thank you. There has to be some technical error on a webinar. If you don't have one, then it's not a real webinar. That's a good way to start. So we are actually going to start and just jump in. We have an amazing panel coming up with really, really great veterans from the field. We're going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your VC, and feel free to also elaborate on investments you've had in the travel tech field. So we're going to start from Johnny. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Inbal.
Johnny,
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Saacks, Managing Partner at F2 Venture Capital. We are a seed stage Israeli deep tech focused fund. And we invest in Israeli companies that we believe have the ability to become world leaders and game changers in their area. We are focused on companies that have an AI, big data, or connectivity element, software focused, and really companies that we believe can scale and become leaders in large markets. And I'll talk later about TravelTech and how we see that world, but it's definitely a very large market, still a very large market, and will become even larger. And I'm happy to be part of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Raj, can you please introduce yourself up next?
Hi, Inbal, Johnny. Good morning, everybody from California. I usually say from sunny California, but very smoky and cloudy these days. Anyhow, it's a pleasure to be with you. Red indeed. Pleasure to be with you all today. I am the Managing Director of Investments for JetBlue Technology Ventures. JetBlue is one of the U.S. airlines, mostly domestically focused. And about 5 years ago, we set up a investment arm called JetBlue Technology Ventures, or JTV. And our objective is, not surprisingly, to invest in travel, transportation, and hospitality. So the restart of travel is very personal and close to our hearts, and looking forward to discussing it all with you later today.
Thank you. And Amir, who's joining us from Israel, I believe, or Red California, one of the two. Amir, can you hear us? Okay, so as Amir is joining, I'll actually introduce myself because I forgot to do that. I manage Google for Startups community in Israel, and we work with early stage startups around the world. Specifically, I'm in Tel Aviv. There's no fog in the sky like in California right now. And Amir, I believe, will join us. So I think we're just going to jump.
I couldn't unmute myself. Pleasure to be with all of you. My name is Amir Amidi with PlugandPlay Tech Center. We've been around since 2006. Travel and hospitality is one out of the 16 industries that we're active in. We launched a travel and hospitality program in 2016, and we currently invest in about 200 startups a year. And our check sizes range from 50,000 USD all the way up to $1 million USD per startup per round. And we work with about 400 corporations around the world and put them in touch with relevant startups that could help them speed up their digital transformation.
Great. So we'd love to actually also see you. So if you can turn on the camera, both Amir and Raj. So we are actually going to jump straight in. Hi, Amir. So I think one of the questions that is on everyone's mind these days, with all the changes that have been happening globally, would you guys look when investing in travel tech companies, and how has the pandemic changed your view on that? We're going to start actually with Amir. Now that we can see his face, we want to hear his answers as well.
Thank you. Our investment thesis hasn't really changed, and I do hear an echo. I apologize. I don't think there's anything I can do on my side. When we started the practice back in 2016, the investment thesis that we had is any technology that could help travel suppliers either increase revenues, lower costs, bring operational efficiency. In the case of airlines and hospitality brands, any technology that could build loyalty amongst existing customer base and future potential customers that goes above and beyond traditional legacy loyalty programs, we would take a serious look at. So that hasn't changed. I would say this year we've invested in 2 startups so far. We typically like to invest in our travel and hospitality practice somewhere between 10 or 20 startups. So I would say the number of investments has decreased, and we're trying to figure out where we want to place our bets. But I would say the startups that we're giving serious consideration to are the ones that touch upon those 4 areas for travel suppliers and service providers. Having said that, I would say we get more excited about startups that not only have a long-term vision and mission, but they also have a solution for the current market environment. So any startup that could help travelers feel safe, inform them in real time about where they're traveling to, what risks they're facing, how they could mitigate any of those risks, has become extremely relevant in light of the pandemic. The other area that we're taking a serious look at, obviously, and I'm sure Raj would say the same thing, is providing a seamless solution in light of the pandemic for people who are brave enough to travel. The funny thing is, we believe that it's actually one of the safest times that you could be traveling, because there aren't that many people traveling. So when you board an airplane, the planes are not usually full. When you go through an airport, it's not as busy as it used to be. So we actually feel like it is a safe time to travel. But I think the average traveler, be it a business traveler or a leisure traveler, does not believe that. So any technology that could inform passengers or travelers in real time about what risks they're facing, what are the safest spots to travel to, which airlines are the cleanest and safest to travel on, those are the areas that we're looking at. And as part of that, we're looking at contactless solutions, anything that could help passengers or travelers self-serve themselves, if you will, more than before. And we think contactless is not something that's only going to be relevant in light of the pandemic. We actually think it's something that needed to happen anyway. So contactless self-serve solutions without taking away the high level of service. Those are definitely areas that we're interested in.
I'm seeing Raj doing this with his face. I'm curious, what's your take? You've been around for I think quite a while, and you've seen also other crises taking place. So how has this pandemic specifically affected your investment strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Inbal, for pointing out how old I am. That's always a good way to start the morning. But you're right, I have been through a number of crises, and so it does have a sort of resemblance to things I've seen in the past. I mean, I would echo what Amir said. So some of the short-term changes driven by the pandemic are around sanitation, cleanliness, and convincing customers that it's safe to fly. And it turns out that the airplane is one of the safest places to be in terms of air quality and cleanliness. The issues are broader than that, however, because certainly in the US, it's unclear for a lot of passengers whether it's safe to travel to a particular destination or not. The rules seem to change relatively quickly and without notice. And so understanding whether you'd have to quarantine, for example, at a particular place that you're arriving at, it's not clear. And so this all depresses the demand for travel. Obviously, as a travel provider, it's in our interest for people to travel. So how do we show them that it's safe? So information is part of it, cleanliness is part of it. But I think the broader issue is that the pandemic has pressed the fast forward button on a lot of technologies. Amir referred to contactless and seamless journeys. those, as he said, were absolutely things that were happening already. They're just happening a lot more quickly now because it's urgent. In general, when we see these recessions occur, which I would call this, what does happen is that things move much more quickly. People are much more motivated to be innovative and to move fast. And so the dilemma for a lot of people is that things are not good, yet now is a great time to invest. And so there's a balance between survival and making sure you have enough money for your operations, and also thinking about the future, because what the last recessions have shown is that those companies that do invest in technology and innovation now, they not only do better during the downturn, they also do better after the downturn. And so if you leave it until things have got better again, you're going to be behind. And so that's an important factor. And one of the reasons why JetBlue Technology Ventures exists is to look for that innovation that we can't necessarily source internally and invest in that, learn from that, and ultimately become a customer of it.
Johnny, what's your take? What do you look for in startups today in the travel tech space, and how has it changed?
So we invest in other things in addition to travel. So we're not only looking at travel, but we are looking, as I said, at technology companies that we believe can disrupt different markets and different verticals. To be very honest, I would have said a year ago, travel was a very crowded and kind of, dealt with market, and it was, because of the size of the incumbents and the innovation going on in them, I would say it was difficult to find new companies, in my opinion, that were very innovative and that we thought could become huge players in that market, because it was crowded. But I think the pandemic has created a new reality, and I think it's created a lot of opportunity. This is true, by the way, not only for travel, but it is also true for travel. And I'll give a few examples maybe of the opportunities that we see. But I think one of the changes, or one of the opportunities that has been created because of the pandemic, is new data sets and new behavior. And it's different behavior and therefore data that we can start collecting that existed up until a year ago. And based on the data up until a year ago, companies were, building their models, etc. And now we face a new reality that this new data can be used by new companies, and they're on the same kind of playing field as the incumbents and the old players. So if they can take these new data sets and new behaviors and new connectivity, etc., they can build, I think, very interesting companies. And the way that we look at it now is, okay, so where can the travel kind of market be disrupted? And where can we leverage that new data set and use our company's algorithms, etc., to get a lead? And if I dissect the market in a very kind of a general way of kind of the planning of travel, and then the booking of travel, and the actual post-booking of travel, and the actual travel itself, going through the airports and through the planes and sitting in the planes, and then the post or the destination part of it, we identified areas where we think real-time data is important because of what I said earlier. And one of the areas that we have identified is kind of the post-booking and the actual traveling, the act of traveling, and how, and I'll use Zenner, even though it's, we're in the Zenner kind of conference, but we identified Zenner as that player that can really disrupt that area and bring disruption-free and aggravation-free travel to the new world. So that's an example of opportunities that we believe have been created because of the pandemic, and I think it's also true, by the way, for the other areas, whether it's education or insurance or retail and e-commerce, and it's definitely true for travel.
Interesting. So thank you all. I think this is a good way to shift into the next question, because we're talking about the future here, and we're in a restarting travel conference. curious to know, what do you think needs to happen for travel to rebound? Meaning, we're talking about a normal travel experience. How will that look like? Again, a little difficult to imagine it today, but in a few months, a few years. Amir, I'm going to pass the mic back to you.
Thank you. So I'd like to break up this question into business travel versus leisure travel, because I think business travel, in the case of myself, will not be the same even once there's a vaccine or a treatment for this virus. I don't necessarily see a reason why I have to get on the plane and fly to London and have 2 meetings and fly back. We recently hosted a webinar with the CEO of Star Alliance and the Chief Experience Officer of Marriott, and actually one of the other managing directors of JetBlue Technology Ventures, talking about business travel, and the consensus was that it's not going to look the same. I think people will get on a plane, travel to London if there's a big deal to be made or if there's a big deal to be lost. But everything that happens in the middle, I think we've all been conditioned over the past 6 months or so that it could happen virtually. So I think business travel will not look the same, and I don't know what the levels will look like post-pandemic, but I think it's going to be. As far as the lead is concerned, I get in trouble for it. I think there needs to be a treatment, or there needs to be a vaccine people are willing to take. And the latest update, at least in North America, is that may take well into 2021 for the vaccine to be available. And then we'll see how many people are actually willing to take that vaccine and know that their exposure to this virus is not going to cause them any harm. But I do believe there's a lot of pent-up demand for leisure travel. So I do see that bouncing back fairly quickly once there is a treatment or a vaccine, and the willingness on behalf of travelers to take that vaccine. When that happens is anybody's guess at this point, because you can kind of estimate when the vaccine is going to be available, but we don't know the willingness of the people. I think there was a survey in North America that somewhere between 30 to 40% of the citizens said that they're not willing to take the vaccine, or at least they don't want to be the first person to take the vaccine. So I think those are the questions that need to be answered. And then, as Raj alluded to, where you're traveling to is going to matter a lot as well. So hotspots obviously are going to take longer to come back. Places that have been able to contain the virus over the past few months and bring it down to levels that are not alarming are going to be safer to travel to, and that may change because we're having outbreaks still happening in places that had it under control. So there's a lot of moving pieces. It's very hard to predict when things, as far as leisure travel is concerned, when things will actually go back to normal. But if I had to put a date on it, I would say somewhere in mid-2021 or late 2021 is where I would place my chips on things going back to somewhat normal for leisure travel. Business travel, I don't even have a date in mind because I don't know what it's going to look like in the coming years.
Thank you. Anyone else here has a take on that? My camera dropped, so I don't know if you guys had an amazing discussion while I was away.
Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
Thank you, Raj. I agree with Amir, with almost all the points. I would just say that, first of all, we have to find a vaccine or, a safe vaccine, something that we're willing to take before travel can resume. But I think there's a new normal, which is physical distance between people, which means that, the actual travel, I think the amount of passengers in an aircraft or in a lounge or, a train or whatever it may be, will change, and therefore there'll be less volume. And therefore, I think for the vendors in that market, the revenue per customer will need to increase. So it'll have to be a higher quality product, more value-added services to offer each individual. And I think there'll be an ecosystem of apps and services that will need to be developed around each passenger, whether it's a business traveler where maybe the ARPU can be higher, or a leisure traveler. So I think that's an ecosystem that will be developed still.
Raj, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a valid point, because the reality is that the airline industry is somewhat similar to banking. You have a lot of long-term obligations. In our case, it tends to be buying airplanes and having, keeping different cities as destinations open. This is very expensive. And it's not only expensive, it's a large outlay. And then what you do is you turn around and you rent a seat on an airplane for a couple of hours for $100. And so on the one hand, you're spending hundreds of millions. On the other hand, you're getting in revenue $100 at a time. And when those $100 at a time dry up, you're left holding a huge debt that you need to service somehow. And traditionally in the airline industry, you've needed your planes to be at least 2/3 full in order for you to break even. Now, the problem is that if you're blocking middle seats, that means that your maximum capacity is 2/3. And so you're almost guaranteed to not make any money. So you either have to raise the prices or change the game in some way. And so this is going to be the challenge over the next few years. And, just to level set, I think, unfortunately, I think Amir is being optimistic. I'm not sure that we're going to see much of an upturn next year. I'm reminded of 9/11, which was a much more, a terrible event, but nonetheless a controlled one, where we could overcome the effects by increasing security. It took 5 years for the airline industry to get back to levels previous to 2001. 2019 happened to be one of the best years ever for aviation. How long it will take us to get back to that level is anybody's guess, but I think it's a number of years. And so in the meanwhile, what might happen? Because I do believe that people do want to travel. Mostly they travel for leisure. I think business travel, indeed, those annoying little meetings that you used to have to travel for, you don't have to travel for anymore. You're going to use Zoom or go to meeting or whatever it might be. And there are problems with these sorts of meetings, as we can see, but inevitably they will get better, they will improve, and people will use them. So even if there's a small shift in the number of business travelers willing to travel, that will have a big implication for travel providers because of our fixed cost base. So in the meanwhile, what might happen, given that people do still like to travel in general? So one thing that might happen is that smaller aircraft might become more common. Perhaps people like Airbnb who don't have a lobby, have fewer people staying, and they're the people that you know in a particular apartment. Perhaps they might be more common. The idea being to limit the number of strangers that you come in contact with. So if I and my company can take a plane that has 8 seats and fill 6 of them and go somewhere without having to encounter other people, perhaps I'll be ready to do that. Today, finding that plane and booking that plane is complicated and expensive, but surely now there's a demand to make it easy such that I could book a small aircraft in the same way as I book a commercial aircraft. So I do believe that that space of general and private aviation will become much more interesting now that we're in the post-pandemic times. So I think it will be tough. I think that a number of travel providers will have to either go under or restructure, with implications for the level of employment, with implications for the pricing. This is one of those markets where if one provider is offering very low prices, there is a huge amount of pressure on all other providers to offer similar prices, because most people tend to judge the value, quote unquote, of their travel just on the price. And so if that still holds, then if somebody's offering a very cheap price, most likely they will take business from the others, and the others will have to either then restructure or find another way to offer value. And honestly speaking, I think that the industry has been relatively uninnovative over the last 20 plus years, and now we will have to be innovative if we want to survive. So the pandemic will bring us a lot of problems. The vaccine itself, I'm not a medical doctor in any way, but my understanding is that the fastest ever vaccine that was produced was for the mumps, and it took 4 years. And so people are questioning if this new vaccine is coming out so quickly, has it been properly tested? Is it safe to take? And, we don't know the answer to that right now. We also are, I think it would be important for us to have therapeutics available such that if you do catch the disease, you can be cured. Again, we have no line of sight on when that might happen. And so consequently, we have entered a period of uncertainty around travel. And I don't believe that uncertainty will clear for a number of years.
Thank you, Raj. It's interesting that none of you guys... Oh, yeah, sorry.
Can I ask Raj and maybe Amir a question?
Of course, feel free.
So, I'm feeding off, Raj, what you just said regarding uncertainty, which I think is, a key factor in the world we live in now. And if price was the main parameter for choosing which airline to fly, which ticket to buy, do you think certainty and safety is now kind of the main parameter in future purchasing, or is it something else?
It might be, but and that would be a logical answer. But if I look at people's behavior and the way that we think about risk, it's somewhat skewed. So a lot of people are worried about traveling on airplanes full stop because they consider them to be very dangerous, not talking about pandemic now, but they will happily get into a car and drive somewhere, often without a seatbelt. And so the way that we think about risk is very much related to us as flesh and blood who perceive things in a certain way. So I think in theory, everybody will absolutely talk about the safety game, but I think in reality, I think price will still be a huge determinant, simply because, we've opened up an era of mass travel, and that would not have happened if it had not been very cheap. And so I'm not sure how we get from here to something which is more expensive but safer. Open question. Don't know the answer.
Sorry, Raj, I'm going to be Israeli here for a second, just because it's interesting looking at the plug and play also on that question. What's your perspective there?
I would 100% agree with Raj that price is always going to be the big factor when it comes to air travel, because it is a commoditized service, and that's how people have been conditioned. I mean, you could say that if you're a loyalty member on Delta, you would prefer to fly on Delta versus American, but I would bet that pricing had something to do with which loyalty program you belong to, and depending on which hubs that you travel to or from. But I think price is always going to be a huge determining factor for people choosing which airline or which flight they want to get on. And again, I think once there is a treatment or vaccine, and when people go back to normal travel, whenever that happens, and maybe I am an optimist thinking that it will, for leisure travel, happen sometime in 2021. I think people will go back to the way they used to travel. I don't think sanitization and safety when it comes to hygiene is something people are going to think about twice until we have another pandemic. People have short-term memories. So long-winded way of saying that I think price is always going to be a factor in the short term, long term. And once there's a treatment or vaccine and it's readily available and people are willing to take it, I don't think people are going to worry as much about social distancing or touching surfaces or getting other people's plane available.
Sounds like the vaccine will be the cure that we're all looking for. I'm really curious, talking back about investments, because we're talking about the future, but right now we have founders listening to us from all around the world. Johnny, I have a question for you. F2 is one of the most active seed stage VCs in Israel. And what is the best tip that you can give right now to an entrepreneur who's listening to you and is in the travel tech space?
Well, I think, it's the same for any entrepreneur. whether it's the travel space or another space. Entrepreneurs need to build companies that they believe in, and that comes from a real kind of need and pain that they have identified, and a passion of theirs to change or to build or to develop something which is large. That's what I'm looking for, but that they believe is something that can actually make an impact and a difference. And I think it's true for any vertical, regardless of what it is, depending on the entrepreneur and where his or her passion lies. In the travel space, I would say, as I said earlier, I think there's a lot of opportunities because of all the different issues that have been discussed and challenges and the changes that the pandemic has brought upon the travel space, and because of the data, that new data that is being, I would say, collected and created. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but any entrepreneur that wants to build a company in this space needs to understand what the implications and what the needs are. And again, it's they have to do it because they have this burning desire to build this company, and there's ups and downs, and never stop, but keep on focusing on the right things at the right time.
Yeah, but drilling down back to your strategy, you actually invested in a travel tech company right when the pandemic broke, correct?
Correct. It was actually.
So what drove your calculus there? That's quite a bold move.
Yeah, it was actually just before the pandemic broke. So it was at the end of 2019 or just January 2020. And we invested because we thought we believed they were addressing an area which was not yet solved well enough, and that is kind of the booking and the actual travel experience around it. And I experienced it, and I'm sure everyone else as business travelers, and it's also true for leisure, but mainly for business travelers, where I believe more of the capital or the expense was. The disruptions that we face as business travelers, whether it's flight cancellations or flight delays and missing meetings and not knowing when to do what, and always finding ourselves on the phone and with our assistants or with our travel agents or on the web, trying to do things which were very inefficient and very uncomfortable and, caused a lot of distress. So, when Zenner came to us and we felt that they would be able to solve this problem through machine learning and AI and technology means, we thought this was a great opportunity. Then the pandemic hit and we said, oh no, what have we done? The travel kind of space has fallen off the cliff, and when will this resume? And as most investors and most companies, I think we started to see, okay, let's stabilize this, and now let's try and identify the opportunities. And I think the opportunity now is even larger than what it was pre-pandemic because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So, we're very optimistic and excited with this investment.
So talking of opportunities, Amir, I'm curious to ask you about trends. We're seeing some new trends emerging. If you can give us 1, 2, even 3 trends and share how do you think they will affect the travel tech ecosystem moving forward?
So I alluded to this earlier. For us, the trends haven't changed. And this is not exclusive to the travel industry. I think any technology that could help industry stakeholders either increase revenues, lower costs, bring operational efficiency through automation and less dependence on human capital, or build loyalty that goes above and beyond legacy loyalty programs. Those are the trends that we look for, underlying trends. In terms of, in light of the pandemic, what trends are we seeing? I would say anything that has to do with sanitization and hygiene. For example, American Airlines recently announced a partnership with a company that does coating on surfaces, and it actually protects that surface up to 7 days. from having any pathogens stick to it. So things like that, I think, are on top of mind right now. But again, once there is a treatment or a vaccine, the question becomes how relevant are they going to be? Contactless, as mentioned, is something that we're seeing good amount of investment taking place into it. Real-time data. Companies, there's a company called Sherpa that went through one of our accelerator programs over the past year or so. They were actually in the e-visa space. So e-visas are being offered more and more by various states and countries. And as soon as the pandemic hit, they actually built a layer on top of the e-visa solution, and they actually provide you with real-time information about the destination you're thinking about traveling to. You know, are there quarantine measures? You know, how many cases in the past week? Are the restaurants open? Basically all the information you need to make a decision to travel to a destination. So that actually has helped them get, you know, business from folks like CWT. They're offering their solution to their customers for business travelers to set their mind at ease that wherever they decide to travel to is actually a safe place to travel to. So real-time information, I think anything that can help travelers or passengers feel safe or not safe. I think not feeling safe is as important as feeling safe. Maybe we should not travel to a certain destination, but anything that has to do with real-time information for people to make an informed decision, I think is has become very relevant in light of it.
Definitely critical. So, Raj, I think as we actually have 5 more minutes, time flies, literally flies. We're in a TravelTech, okay? Zoom jokes. Somebody needs to make a startup for Zoom jokes. That would be a good one. So I'd love to know, what are the prominent challenges that JetBlue is facing that startups can solve these days, looking at the future work you're going to be doing with founders?
I think we touched on most of those themes today. The JetBlue's existential crisis is, when will people start traveling again? And what do we do in order to help that happen? So some of that will be around the business model. How do we change our pricing? How do we attract people to try the service again? Some of it will be around the assets that we deploy. How do we make them more flexible? How do we perhaps make them less of a fixed cost and more of a variable cost? So changing of the business model again. A lot of it is about accelerating things that were already in play, be it real-time data, be it cleanliness, if you like, linking up the different elements of the journey. So one of the things I always say is that you can book a flight, but you can't book a journey. How do you book a journey? And how do you make sure that once you book that journey, that you have control of it, that you're not spending hours on the phone with your assistant or travel agent trying to sort out a problem as they occur, but they're solved in real time and easily for you. So this, I think, is, the pandemic is something which is, again, it's accentuating things that were already existing in our business, and we have to find solutions for them more quickly than we'd expected. Right at the start, I think maybe it was Amir that said that you can go to the airport and maybe it's safer because there's fewer people there. Well, thinking about the airport experience, when you go in a normal time a year ago and it was crowded, what you would notice is that things are hectic and difficult, and getting all the way onto the plane and off the plane is a difficult thing. Today, the process is very easy. You come to the customs and immigration, you come to security, there are no lines, it takes seconds to get through. You can go to a store in the airport, you're served immediately. There's no issue about getting on the plane, off the plane. There's plenty of baggage storage for you to put your bag in. So what this tells me is that the process that we use today doesn't scale, or hasn't scaled historically. So the real big challenge for us will be, how do we convince people to come back to travel, and how do we change the process in a way that we make travel a pleasure, or at the very least, we take away the hassle, so that people feel comfortable about doing it and the experience is pleasant enough that they'll want to do it again.
What would be the advantage for a startup wanting to work with you guys in relation to other companies?
We always push the fact that we are part of the industry and so therefore have a lot of expertise in how the industry actually works. Whereas all of us, I'm sure, on the call today have traveled frequently. Very few of us on the call today actually know how a travel provider works. And a lot of those crazy things that happen and you say to yourself, why on earth are they doing this, are driven by those underlying issues. And so in order to solve them, sometimes you can be like Alexander the Great and take your sword through the Gordian knot and solve the problem. But most of the times you need to unravel the knot. And so knowing how the knot is tied is an important asset. So we come across many great founders and great companies who don't have a travel background. And so our advantage is being able to help them with our access to expertise and with the fact that we can offer them a proof of concept with us and our partners. So that's the advantage, is giving them that real experience in travel such that they can take their ideas and test them, refine them, and eventually be successful with them.
We have 2 minutes left. Thank you, Raj. Is there anything, Johnny or Amir, that you'd like to add? Any travel tech jokes here, Zoom jokes? We have time for maybe 1 or 2.
No jokes, but I think, as it was mentioned earlier, we're big believers that travel is not going away. It's part of human nature. It's a question of when, not if, it will come back. And as Raj and John alluded to, there's a lot of opportunities out there. It's tricky because...
Are you still running the accelerator, by the way? Sorry for intruding. Just that we had a question come up.
Yeah, we actually just...
It's still open.
Yeah, so batch 10 for Silicon Valley. We're running one for IATA out of Geneva that's restarting actually on Wednesday of this week. We have one in Vienna for Europe. So all the accelerator programs are up and running, and we work with roughly 40 travel suppliers across all the different travel programs that we have around the globe. One of the longest lasting members and partners is JetBlue Technology Ventures. We have about 7 co-investments with them. But the message I want to send out is that travel is coming back. The tricky part is, how do you sustain yourself in the meantime? The unfortunate news is that we've seen some of our portfolio companies pivot completely outside of travel, 2 of them, in fact. And I hate seeing that happen. But at the same time, I can't blame the entrepreneurs. You know, they don't want to sit around scratching their heads and waiting, playing the waiting game to see when travel is going to come back. But it will come back for the people that are able to sustain themselves and not give up and come up with creative ways of offering something in the short term that has value and can generate revenues. I think they're going to come out of this very, very strong, because we are seeing a lot of entrepreneurs leave the travel industry, unfortunately, due to the pandemic. Yeah. So those survivors...
Definitely hope so.
In the long term.
We hope so, and I'd like to thank everyone here for your insights. I can just tell you my mom already booked a flight ticket to Berlin yesterday for a month, so she's a fearless woman. I hope to follow her footsteps soon. And thank you for everyone who's joining us. We're going to be moving to the next session. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Raj and Amir. And we will pass the mic back to Daniel. So thank you, guys, and have a wonderful rest of the morning or evening.